Hello everyone, my name is Camelia Lenart and I had the pleasure to present my paper, Dancing with Angels, Religion and Resistance in Communist Romania, last June in the symposium, The Cold War and End of Times. My presentation offered new perspectives on the little investigated topic of religious resistance through art during communism, with a special emphasis on Romanian dance. My work was at the intersection of dance history, religious and Cold War history, as well as personal history. I analyzed the role of art as a silent yet original and powerful tool used by the artists during the religious prohibitions and persecutions in Romania, revealing the way in which the dancers, modern and classical, courageously encoded religious and supernatural themes in their works during the last two very traumatic decades of the Romanian communism. For a child of communist Romania like me, religion was a taboo topic. My parents were educated and they were supposed to set an example for the other people, for the communities they lived in order and to show that they could exclude from their existence the poison religion was considered to be. Authorities linked religion and religious feelings and being a good communist, and they considered that it was an incompatible relationship. The complex relationship, though, between religion and the Cold War affected my life, but what I discovered when I became interested in this topic, that it attracted a great deal of scholarly attention. I think of Andrew Preston's, Diane Kirby's works, as well as of my co-national Lucian Leuștean's fantastic book, Orthodoxy and the Cold War. However, there is no book yet on the relationship between religion and the visual arts during the Cold War. Thus, I consider my presentation as a contribution to this field of studies, or shall I say a subfield of studies. And what I did at the symposium, I had the pleasure to present my work in the context which interests me very, very much, is the 60s. They are the fabulous 60s of the Romanians, because in 1965, a new president of the Communist Party and of the country took the power, and he looked at the beginning like a very enlightened type of a communist. He was promising to create a socialism with a human face, and therefore the international let's say media and also the politicians from abroad were looking at him like the new kid of the block, on the block of the communist regimes, and also like the one who was able to reform communism. Ceausescu used religion in his own advantage because he knew that it would attract a positive attention, and it did indeed. And therefore, after he came into power, there was a sort of thawing of the relationship between communist regime and the religion. There were less closed monasteries. There were formally, besides formally imprisoned clergy, were rehabilitated, like my great-great uncle, who was released from prison after 10 years of serving there due to the fact that he was a priest. And also, a limited number of churches were built. Now, as I said, all these were just a maneuver of the dictator Ceausescu to attract attention. However, this apparent leniency towards religion allowed Romanian artists, dancers, choreographers, filmmakers to think outside of the book of the artistic social realism and to use it as a source of inspiration. It was most interesting the way in which between 1965 and 1971, Romanian dancers negotiated a relationship with the communist power, and even if it was incomplete and limited, their own artistic liberty. Inventively and courageously, Romanian artists used religion in their creation as a form of freedom, internal, personal, rediscovered, and as a reconnection with a more normal historical past as well. This resistance was a form of opposing the communist regime and its brutality. The main method artists used to play along was to play along the dictator's national obsessions, and the authorities' renewed interest in the Romanian folk traditions. During that time, old fairy tales, customs, folk dances, as well as the village, the countryside, became available, and they were rediscovered and became acceptable sources of inspiration for artists. It was an irony that the return to the folklore, allowed and encouraged by the communist authorities, was a safe method to increase the national sentiment on one hand, but also on the other to return to the religious essence of the Romanian culture. Movies based on the fairy tales were shot, with extensive dancing scenes in which, under the eyes of the censors, a lot of them were not educated and they didn't have an intellectual background, but also under the safe folkloric umbrella, religious themes resurfaced and again entered the lives of the Romanian audience. One pertinent example, in my presentation I used two examples. One was a movie from 1969. I saw it later during my childhood, and it was called Kingdom in the Clouds, what a name, based on a fairy tale called Youth Without Old Age. At a closer look, one could see that the choice of this fairy tale by the director of the movie was not coincidental. It is actually the reverse story of Adam and Eve expelled from the heaven, packed with Christian symbols and motifs, such as the good versus evil, the apple, the notion of loving your neighbor, and also to love yourself, and the quest for the eternal kingdom. However, my biggest pleasure was to research and to find symbolism and also messages in actually a documentary. It was not a movie, was not an artistic movie, how they were called during that time, but it was a documentary, and it was shot in 1971. It was called The Great Passage, and it had a surreal quality comparable with the ones of some movies from the New Wave cinema. In that documentary, just to explain it briefly, a choir of women dressed up as nuns were singing Byzantine and Gregorian chants, which were part of the Eastern Orthodox tradition. The narrator, Lucian Blaga, a famous actor, used lines from Lucian Blaga, a famous Romanian poet who was also linked to religion in many, many ways, and it had religious connotations. Just imagine that the movie was shot in the ruins of a deserted industrial park. Nuns and dancers performing among the broken iron frames, creating an apocalyptic scenery and used symbolic imagery, giving the viewer an intense metakinetic feeling, while being at the same time a criticism, not a praise, of the dictatorial regime the Romanians were subjected to. If you want to watch the movie, that it's on internet, it's visible, it's there, and it's absolutely fantastic. It was, not surprisingly, banned during the communist times, and it was never seen until after the Romanian Revolution, which ended the regime in 1989. However, in 1971, exactly when the movie was made, the religious freedom, the communist religious freedom, which was actually an oxymoronic term, ended, because Ceausescu traveled to North Korea and got inspiration from the big parades and wanted to establish his regime's symbolism through this. So what happened? We lived it. I have to end now, and I said, Alison and James, thank you very much again for organizing this fantastic symposium. And I'd like just to say that I'm continuing my research on the topic of dance as a form of resistance, which is absolutely a fantastic and fascinating topic. And also that I'll go back to Romania as soon as possible. We live hard times. It's not the apocalypse, but we live hard times. And I will continue to further and enrich my work. Thank you very much. Stay safe.